Hi, this is Kylie Koo. Welcome to my studio. So this project is for the event being run by the Creative Arts Collaboration, and it's a hashtag event, Love Fall Art 2019, and there'll be a link below to the playlist where you can see the work of the various artists and crafters participating. So to get me in the mood today, I took a walk around my garden, took a few snaps that I'm showing you here. And I realised that as well as the colours that we associate with autumn, with fall, the browns, the golds, etc., there's also a lot of greenery there. So I want to reflect that in my project today as well. So I've taken a piece of A3 hot pressed watercolour paper. You saw it there. And I've just made it into small cards, 3 by 5 inches, around about 7.5 by 12.5 centimetres. And what I'm planning to do today is a number of different journal cards, so cards that I will be able to use in journals or send to friends to use as well. So I'm going to use the jelly plate for 2 or 3 cards, but I've also pulled out some stamps that I made for a project last year, and I'll put the link to that video below. I'm going to use some of these fluid acrylics to start with. So all I'm going to do is take my pen and to run it along these leaves, just to take any paint out that's built up. I've not used them for a little while, and there was ink and paint in them, so I'm just kind of going over the leaves there to make sure that I try as far as possible to get a nice print. What I'm also doing is just running them off on this piece of paper to get any ink or anything that was left on it before, and you'll see there's actually quite a bit. And it's quite strange because I just started off with this just as a kind of drop sheet, just to clean the stamps, and this has ended up quite a nice, interesting piece of paper. So in a minute you'll see me start to use the jelly plate to do some printing onto the cards. Now, 2 other mentions I want to make other than the Creative Arts Collaboration. One is to say that later on in this video I will let you hear a poem that I wrote. Now, I wrote this a year ago, and it was actually for a prompt in my good friend Tanya, who has a channel Tart and Taz Creates, and her Facebook group where she does a series of prompts, and the prompt one month was to write a poem. And I wrote the poem. I intended to do a project at that time but didn't get round to it. So a year on, I'm now doing the project, albeit it's different to the one that I intended at the time. The other thing I want to do is to say that the poem that I wrote was actually inspired by a comment that one of my subscribers left me, and she'll know who she is because I actually told her about this at the time, and although I didn't get round to doing the project last year, I promised her I would do it this year, so I hope she's watching. So here I am, just putting down layers of paint and using those stamps, and then taking my cards and putting them over the gel plate to lift the print. And what I'm trying to do with this one is to get a series of layers. Now, this is a long video, so I might put some bits. It's at the moment I've put it on at double time, but I might put some bits on even faster because you'll get the gist of what it is that I'm doing here. But I did want to let you see as far as possible the entire process. So I repeat this process over and create 3 cards using the gel plate. Now, I said that I'd been inspired by a subscriber, and what she had told me was how autumn and seeing the leaves reminds her of her father and of other people who have gone from her life in the physical sense now. And it got me to thinking, similar things. And this is a very important time of the year. I know many people love fall simply because of the colours, but it's important too in many ways, certainly here in my country, in Scotland. It's always been seen as a very important time as we move through harvest, through the fall and into the winter. So it seemed very apt to be doing this project, but I also wanted it to be a project that brings hope, and that's why I will introduce some green in places as well, just so we're reminded of evergreen and of hope. So as I finish this off, this piece with the gel print, I'm just going to read my poem. Autumn Leaves Fall by Kylie. As the leaves fall, I am reminded of you. Each leaf a life lived, and I am reminded of you. For some, they see the end. Summer has gone. And what now? What for them that have passed? Some take delight in the autumn hues, but then what? Leaves raked and gone. But as the leaves fall, I am reminded of you. I am reminded of our life, the life we shared. A love shared, a love that is infinite, that holds us tight and binds us forever. As the leaves fall, I am reminded of you. Each leaf a life lived, and always I am reminded of you. So, in a sense, this is about many different things to different people, and I'm also thinking of a friend who experienced a loss this year, and I hope she's watching and knows that this is also for her. And I'm reminded too of my loss, different losses this past year. And just keeping in mind that although those we've lost may not be with us in the physical sense, their presence will always be felt. And so, as I say, I will later on bring some green in because I want to remind myself and others of the evergreen. But you know, if all you enjoy fall for is those colours, then that's fine, because the colours are truly wonderful at this time of year. So there I am, I'm just rolling off onto that sheet again, just wanting to capture as much paint as possible and not waste anything. So there's the three that I've used with the jelly plate, and I will now put them to the side. They're not finished, there is some more that I will do to them. And I'm now taking out these twinkling H2Os. So I use the golden nugget, the harvest sol, the desert clay, and I think I use the raspberry wine. The other two that I showed I don't actually use. And again, what I want to do is 3 cards using these. So I'm just wetting these to get them started. So while the water settles on those, I've taken this VersaFine ink pad in sepia, and I'm just going to start using my handmade foam leaves again and just print those onto one of the blank cards. So I'm just putting the ink on, laying them in place. They do sometimes stick to the fingers a bit and move, but overall it's fine. And just using an acrylic block to push those down and to try and stamp it all over. So I'm going to add a bit more here and there. And just like in nature, the leaves will overlap a little bit, you know, when they fall. They obviously land on top of each other. So just doing a bit of that. Now I'm giving it a good dry here. I want to make sure it's dry before I move on to the next stage. And the next stage is I'm just going to take some of these twinkling 2Os and just start to paint the colour on, just using those 3 colours. Blending them a little bit where they touch, but not trying to get an even effect over. So again, drying, I smooth out a couple of bits of paint. I don't mind that there may be lines in it, you know, I'm trying to get something that is uneven. I'm quite happy with that, and even with the little marks it's left on it. So I move on to the second using these, and this time all I'm going to do is to do just a general background using the three colours. Made it quite watery, I've watered them down quite a bit. Now, because I'm using this direct onto card, you don't always get the benefit of the twinkling H2O. Sometimes you see more of their effect when they're on top of other colours, but I wanted to use these today because of the colour, and it does bring out a little bit of the effect. So here I'm doing the third card, and what I want to do this time is a bit of the ombre effect. So I'm going to use the three colours just to try and get three bands, but them all blending together. So the lightest at the top, the medium in the middle, and the darkest down the bottom. At this point I have a rough idea where I'm going to take this one to, but not absolutely certain. But you see, I just work away a bit at it, just trying to blend those together. So this in a sense almost reminded me of one of the sunsets or one of the early morning skies as well that we sometimes get at this time of year, and I was pleased the way that turned out. So on to my third set of cards. Now I will be doing more work on these, but what I'm trying to do initially is to get the bases done. So I'm using here some of my Pebeo Dyna paints, iridescent paints, and this is where I want to bring in some of the brighter colours so that fall can be seen in a joyous sense as well. Although my poem had some sadness to it, I did intend that it would have hope, and it's there also as a kind of act of remembrance. So taking this, I think it's a yellow-green to begin with, and just giving it a nice thick coat, spreading it out a little but leaving some texture in it. Moving on to this orange next, a very vibrant colour, and again just doing a similar thing, leaving it reasonably thick, leaving some of the brush marks in it so that it creates a little bit of texture. And then finally, I think this is described as a red blue, and mixing it also with the sort of pink colour. I think it's a violet blue or something like that it's called. So just doing the two here. They're quite similar in terms of colour, and by the time they're blended it's quite difficult to see that there's two colours on there. These are quite thick, and at this stage I think, oh, maybe I could put some of the leaves down, see if it leaves an imprint. A lot of this is just about experimenting. So I lift that up. Difficult to see on camera, but some of the leaf imprints are actually there. And of course I'm going to give those a good dry. So I have my backgrounds created, and now it's time to move on to the next stage. Although what I'm doing, again, just making sure I get all that excess paint off, and this is going to make a lovely collage piece for future. So just looking now at how I will decorate these further, again just using my handmade leaf stamps. So laying them out, just looking at possible patterns, as I said, what I'd created basically was background cards, so now I wanted, for some anyway, a kind of focal point. And with this first one, I'm just going to use this big leaf. I'm going to use my embossing stamp and embossing powder. I should say embossing pad rather than embossing stamp. Making sure that I really push the stamp down into the pad. I want to get plenty of the ink on that. Putting the excess powder back into the jar, and then I'll take my heat tool to activate it, and you can see it changing there. So this one, a very bold looking focal point. I want to try them in different ways. With this one I use a gold ink pad. This was a bit of a fail, I think, because the pad is basically done. I think most of the ink is out of it now. It might do on something lighter, but wasn't really showing up on this one. So I put that off to the side. Then I take the metallic bronze, and all I'm going to do is to actually run that over my little stamps and then stamp onto the card. Now it's on there quite thick, so it will come out quite thick. Just use a piece of paper to make sure I can push them down with my roller. And what I get with that one is quite a nice bit of texture on it. So looking at this one, I almost envisage this as trees. Just looking at how I might arrange them. And I go to use my sepia pad again. But I realise that that's not going to be dark enough against this particular colour. I'm looking at different ways as to how I can do this, but I then take out a black StazOn, and I'm going to stamp them one at a time. The problem with the foam is sometimes it sticks to the fingers, especially when you have paint or anything on your fingers. So, you know, they were kind of lifting at times, but it's fine. So just stamping each one individually. So this one gives more of a kind of silhouette effect. But I do like all the texture in the background that came from that initial stamping. So I move on to this one. I quite liked that first one where I'd done the stamping first and the H2Os on top. This one is really reverse. So I've got the background and now I'm going to stamp on the top with the sepia ink. And it actually gives quite a similar effect. Again, just trying to get that notion of leaves on top of each other. I like the fact here that it's not a bold stamp. To me, it has a kind of ethereal feel to it, almost semi-transparent. So I like the way this turned out, and I think I'll be making a few more like this. I also like the way that the leaves aren't always coming out whole in terms of the way that they're stamped, because if you look at leaves lying around in a garden or in a park, you know, they do start to break up. This last one, I wanted to just use one stamp on it to almost make it look a bit like a tree, and it reminded me of another autumn fall painting that I did a few years ago, and again I will leave a link to that. That was a mixed media piece, and it may well have been for the CAC. I can't remember for definite, but it may well have been. I'll link it anyway. Each time just making sure to dry it off so that the ink doesn't smudge. The ink, especially on some of these cards, because of the way it reacts with some of the paints below, you know, there is a possibility that it would smudge. So now I'm just going to use my gel plate really as a kind of palette. I just want to take the leaves and put them down. So I'm using the gold iridescent to begin with on that orange background. So it's quite pale, you can see it, but just trying to get a bit more background down, and then I'll build it up from there. Again, not wasting anything, so I lift almost a ghost print from the gel plate. Now I've taken I can't remember if it's bronze or copper I think, and just going to do a similar thing on top of that layer. I didn't even dry it, I'm just doing it directly on top. And this is just about trying to create some depth. With a number of the cards, I was trying to create depth by layering up. And again, overlapping the leaves. So with the one with the green background, I wanted to keep this very bright, so I've gone back and taken the orange paint again, and again just using this as a stamp. And to me, the green in the background just represented the amount of green that I have in my garden, albeit it's more a darker green just now, but I did want some bright colours. So this was just my representation of the kind of green of the grass, green of the evergreen trees, but the leaves coming down. And again, just trying to use up every single piece of paint. So this time, introducing some green to the card that started off that kind of pink way. I put a bit of the orange on top there, and just doing a single print on this one. And that kind of reminds me of some of the tall, I forget what they call them, it's a particular type of conifer. It grows very tall, very thin. I have a few in the garden. So at this point I'm ready to go on and do the kind of finishing touches. So taking my gold Posca, just trying to get a little bit down on one side of this as if the sun was touching the side of this tree in this case. Using it again here, it does flood a little. I just spread it out, that's fine. I then revert to just a gel pen just to get a little hint of a kind of yellow gold on here. All I'm trying to do is just add a little bit of interest and a little bit more dimension by doing that. I don't want to do it on every card. With this one, I'm taking a green gel pen and just kind of outlining what's become a tree, adding a bit of ground, and I'm going to start to put some borders on as well. At this point, I remembered that I actually wanted to round the edges of the cards, so I stop just to do that with all of them. Putting on a few different borders, which reminds me that I do have a video on borders for kind of journaling cards and journal pages, and again I will link that. Using the Posca, not too concerned if it floods a bit here because I'm just trying to get a very sketchy border in places around this one. And just a kind of faux stitch effect here. So let me remind you, this is for the Creative Arts collaboration event #LoveFallArt 2019. You could put that into the YouTube search bar and it will come up with the various videos, or you can follow the link that I'll put in the description box below. So here just using an orange pen which complements the orange that I used with the leaves, and I think that stands out nicely against that green background. So here we have them all. Journaling cards inspired by autumn, and a poem earlier inspired by a subscriber and a prompt from Tanya. So I do hope you've enjoyed this. As always, I thank you ever so much for watching. Bye for now.